Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Rochelle Rich.
Boker Tov. I'm honored and a little humbled and totally nervous to be delivering this morning's devar. Today will be a day filled with learning, networking across state lines and center sizes, and a ton of inspiration and amazing ideas. So it's a lot of pressure to kick today off right. I'm hoping I can deliver. I was asked to share with you a few thoughts about the Jewish value, Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh Lezeh, which means we are all responsible for one another. I love that I was asked to speak about this, as it's a guiding value for me on a daily basis, both in my personal and professional life. From Masod HaChamim, in the parable of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochim, each person does not sail in his own personal boat, but we all, the entire community, sail in the same boat. And if one person pokes a hole in it, even just in the area of the boat where he is sitting, he is causing a hole in the shared boat, and the water that penetrates inside does not discriminate between the area of the hole poker and the rest of the boat. A person may not say that I am the master over myself and do what I want. If the action of an individual is bad for the community must get involved and prevent it from occurring. When I was asked to speak about this, it wasn't immediately clear to me which direction I might go. A few days later, the bomb threats reached our tiny corner of Western North Carolina, and I had more material than I could possibly fit into the next few minutes. About a week before we got our call, one of the local churches contacted us after seeing the national news coverage of other centers' threats to offer their site up as an evacuation location, even offering to come over with their buses and transport our kids. Within a few minutes of the news breaking about our evacuation, a member of the community showed up with chocolates just because she didn't know what else to do. And then she was still in the parking lot when I went out a few minutes later. She got out of her car and walked over to me and asked if it would be okay if she gave me a hug. That was just the beginning. Stacks of cards and notes from all over the country, sidewalk chalk messages. One morning, our parents and members were greeted by about 20 local church clergy from various denominations, handing out flowers and serving coffee and breakfast. And here's the best part. I'm not telling you anything that you didn't already have happen in your own communities. The warmth from the community embrace was amazingly powerful. Interestingly enough, I found myself thinking about what the hours and days that followed would have been like without the outpouring of support from the community. And while that kind of support wasn't anything I had given any thought to prior, I immediately realized how needed it was, and also how deafening the silence would have been without it. Several of my colleagues from other JCCs checked in with me immediately that day. Sarah from Milwaukee messaged me on Facebook, Mark from New York texted me, Monica from Birmingham called me. I mention this because it wasn't until they reached out to me that I realized how much I needed to hear from them. And it was also when I realized that I hadn't done the same for them in the weeks preceding. Unfortunately, the weeks after gave me opportunity to be their support, as two of those centers received calls. All this helped provide context for me to realize that within our means, we are all responsible for one another. We are responsible for caring for each other by calling to check in on each other's well-being. We are responsible for helping to prevent injustice by providing safe conversation spaces and opportunities for dialogue. We are responsible for backing each other up when we can offer support. We are responsible for building up one another's confidence when self-confidence is waning. In the context of this professionals conference, we are responsible for challenging ourselves to be our best selves. Our best selves have much to learn, and yet we also have much to offer our colleagues. Our collective energy, passion, and enthusiasm could keep just about any boat afloat, even one with a hole. My hope and my challenge is that we embrace this responsibility. I believe that this value makes us who we are, and that we as individuals and as a community are stronger, healthier, and infinitely better because of it. I have the pleasure of introducing our keynote this morning. Kevin Trapani has been president and CEO of the Redwoods Group since its inception in 1997. Kevin is a regular speaker at Duke University's Hart Center for Ethical Leadership and has been named one of the 50 most influential leaders in the state of North Carolina for his deep involvement in multiple philanthropic interests and his leadership of what is broadly recognized as one of the most innovative, socially conscious, for-profit companies in the nation. And as a member of the North Carolina community, I have a gift for Kevin as well. It's some of our JCC swag with the word Kahila, which means community, and since that's what he's going to be speaking about, I thought it was appropriate.
Perfect, Rochelle. Thank you so much.
Hopefully you don't have to wear it till the spring or next winter.
Thank you. Rochelle, what a beautiful, beautiful message. And to start with the word Kahila is the perfect way to begin. Folks, I will also echo one of Rochelle's messages, which is that I am completely humbled to be able to speak to you today. I come to you today to speak at a relatively difficult time. We all understand why it's difficult, but we don't understand why it's happening. I want to talk today about how we engage in community in a way that can transform us and transform community, because we're called to do just that. I'm going to invite you to think about security and security theater and engagement as unique and discrete and each important. My Twitter handle is on this slide. I've come now for a long time to understand that often when people are staring at their phones while I'm speaking, it's because they're bored to death, but sometimes it's because they want to light me up on Twitter. And that's okay. I hope that I will have some ideas to share today that will make you think and help you to act in ways that are authentic to our shared values. So let's get after it. It's important for us to begin today's conversation with a sense of context, with a sense of the broad societal circumstances that we find ourselves in today. Not just those that affect us as a Jewish community, but those that affect us as a global society. In this country, 1 in 4 live in poverty, and poverty, as determined by the United States government, for a family of 4 is just under $24,000 a year in income, which I'm not sure which is a crazier number. Some people think for most regions of the country, a more appropriate designation for a family of 4 would be just over $35,000 for the poverty level. And if that was the number we used, 1 in 3 of our children would be living in poverty today. I don't believe that's what our founders had in mind when they put this great democracy together. In this country, by the time they turn 18, 1 in 10 kids at least will have been sexually abused. 100,000 kids every year, an epidemic by any measurement. In the world, 1 in 100 are refugees. 6 in 10 in Syria. More every day. And closer to home, we know that the values we hold dear in our society aren't often enough being lived into by every one of the citizens. We see horrific acts practiced on communities that do nothing but make themselves open to all. We've become now comfortable with this kind of a scenario, with bomb-sniffing dogs. I want to stop for 1 second and just say this. I'm an American. I'm a Christian. This is not who we are as Americans. This is not who we are as a society or as a community. I deplore what has happened in these weeks. I deplore the acts of a fringe few who can so threaten a community that I love. And on behalf of all Americans, I apologize. And I call all of us to act in ways that are different and more effective to keep all in our society safe. I don't know if you're a fan of Chris Rock or not, but he has one of the great lines of all time, I think. He said, "If ignorance is bliss, consciousness can be miserable." What he means is really simple. It is that knowing requires us to act. Knowing gives us, in some ways, the burden, but always the obligation to act. Once we know, we can't unknow something. We have seen horrific things. We have been exposed to the worst of what can happen. We are no longer ignorant about the forces of society that would harm us. That burden can be miserable. We find ourselves in a difficult place. And in your faith and in mine, at these moments, the most important thing to do is to begin in prayer. And so I'm going to ask you to join me just that way. If you would, speak this prayer with me. Oh God, you have bound us together in a common life. Help us in the midst of our struggles for justice and truth to confront one another without hatred or bitterness, and to work together with mutual forbearance and respect. Amen. How are we called by our faith to act in this day and age? What are we called to be and do? Specifically, how do we meet hate with hope? Specifically, how do we respond to the threat with an open hand? I told you that I was going to talk a little bit today about the difference between security theater, and engagement. I'm well aware, as we were talking about just a few minutes ago, that when your cell phone rings today, often your immediate concern is, oh God, what has happened? What is the emergency that I have to respond to? Are we newly at risk? And too often when your phone rings, these are the people you're worried about. That must be what's on the other end of that call. And our response almost always involves gates and guns. But what's really important to understand is that while some gates and some guns are necessary, they aren't really the core of what keeps us safe. There aren't enough gates and guns in the world to keep us safe from a madman who will harm us. That doesn't mean that there shouldn't be some gates and some guns in our response, but we have to understand that sometimes there's a requirement for some security theater to help folks feel safer, even though that's not what necessarily keeps them safer. The recognition of the stranger, radical hospitality, the use of technology, those are the things that go on behind the scenes that help keep us safer. Vetting our members and our programs and our locations and our destinations, those are the things that keep us safer. engaging in the wider community, not barring the doors and the windows, not closing ourselves off, not building a wall. Those aren't the things that keep us safer. The things that keep us safer are kahila, our community. We have to think in a more nuanced way about how to keep our communities safe and rich and nurturing and loving and supportive. Because that's what our faith calls us to do. We have to begin in the face of terrible adversity to think in a nuanced way about our response. We're called to lead by all kinds of folks, but there's one guy I frankly miss a little bit, and I'm going to quote him here. President Obama said, "Change will not come if we wait for some other person or some other time. We are the ones we've been waiting for. We are the change we seek." That's a lot more words, because I guess what he could have said in this room was this. Right? Isn't tikkun olam the acts that we commit to perfect this world that is broken? Isn't it about the acts, not just about our faith? In the Christian tradition, in the book of James, it says something exactly the same. It says, faith without works is dead. We are called by our shared faith to act differently. What does that look like? Well, in Seattle, at Jewish Family Services, it looks like this. That young lady is the woman who runs their refugee resettlement program. And she's looking over mattresses and furniture and all kinds of things that have been donated to create a new home for people who fled terror. Something about which the Jewish community knows a little bit. Now that might seem like just a musty warehouse, and what could that possibly mean? How could that really work at scale? Well, what I want you to know is it means an awful lot to this Syrian refugee and his baby, new arrivals to this country, new people pursuing a uniquely American dream, facilitated by Jewish Family Services in Seattle. What does that look like in your community? I don't know. But I can guarantee you it looks more like this than it does a closed, locked gate monitored by a security guard. Engaging with all of the different elements of society in powerful ways, in intimate ways, is essential for us to protect and enrich community. It's hard. It's hard when people are calling and threatening and vandalizing to extend an open hand. But it is, after all, the only way that we can ensure that community operates the way we want it to operate, the way we are called to have it operate. This may sound overwhelming. It might sound impossible. It might sound like, from my small place in the world, what can I possibly do? What I want to be clear about is that you can only lead from where you stand. I get that. We're not all Barack Obama. We're not all Donald Trump. We're not all leaders of the world. We can only lead from our own small platform, but we must lead. Because it's what we're called by our faith to do. Think about how we live our lives every day. I think we invite threats every day. I do. When you get back to work, you'll be surrounded by threats and by risk. This little girl is in your care for hours every day. maybe overnight at camp. This little boy can't swim, but he's depending on you to help him learn. Until then, we've invited a tremendous threat. At camp, we've got people 60 feet above the ground all day, every day. In our buildings, we have people climbing rock walls. We invite threats every day. Our buildings are filled with people who, if they were in our home, we'd be nervous. Can they make it up or down the stairs or down the hallway? And we invite them in to what? To community. To what they look forward to every day. And we invite the risk that they present. And day after day and night after night, we have events in our facilities that enrich our community and invite all manner of people to fellowship. Indeed, sometimes to revolution. It's who we are when we're at our best. We invite and embrace threats every day, but we prepare for them. We're not blind to what we face. And the way we approach these threats is with an open hand. We can stop all drownings. It's simple. Close the pool. It's not what we do. We embrace that risk. We hire terrific lifeguards. And then, when we're at our best, we engage our lifeguards with the very threat we've embraced. We reach out to the people most at risk and help them to help themselves. That's who we are as community. We go belly to belly with the people who so depend on us for that extra tug on the harness, and then we send them 50 feet into the air. We check the carabiners. We make sure it's safe. And then we send them off at tremendous risk. And by the way, the people who let us put that harness on them trust us. They trust us with their lives. They trust us with their children. They trust us because we know that what's at the core of our actions is our faith, our duty, and our love. That's who we are when we're at our best. We hire great staff, and every day that staff creates community amongst themselves and amongst the kids, day after day when we're at our best. Still, there are challenges. When you accept threats with an open hand, you also understand that when we're not at our best, bad things can happen. Sometimes when the cell phone rings, it's because we've had a child touched inappropriately. Sometimes when the cell phone rings, it's because a child didn't come out of the pool alive. Here's what's important to understand. When we're talking about security and safety, once we commit to accepting a risk, we can't tolerate making a mistake. More often than not, when a bad thing happens at one of our JCCs, it's not because we didn't know what to do. It's not because we didn't know how to keep a child safe. More often than not, we knew what to do. We had the right protocol. We knew where the lifeguard should be stationed. The lifeguard knew where he or she should be looking and how often to scan the bottom of the pool. We had the right protocol. More often than not, the problem is that the practice didn't match the protocol. One of my favorite cities in the world is London. There are a lot of reasons for that, even though I'm a risk management geek. This is the thing that I love the most about the city of London. If you've ever been in the London tubes, just before you step onto the rail car, there's a sign everywhere that says "Mind the gap." Now, of course, it's talking about the gap between the rail car and the platform. In my view, that's the metaphor for us, because that gap is the gap between our protocols and our practices, and it's in that gap that people die. And that's true for lifeguarding, it's true for abuse prevention, it's true for safe transportation, and it's true for keeping a madman out of our building. Once we decide that our communities are open to all, which they are, we are accepting a set of threats that requires us to behave in a certain way, all day, every day, without fail, no gap tolerated. Love thy neighbor. That commandment doesn't say, love thy Jewish neighbor. We are all neighbors. We are all in community with one another. We are responsible for one another. Remember that line about consciousness potentially being misery? We know, therefore we must act. We know that we accept threats all day, every day. And we know how to make those threats, those risks, acceptable. Here are 3 principles I want to make sure that we embrace. The first is that in order for us to be able to accept risk, we must have safety at the core of our culture. Do you remember the first time somebody suggested to you that it might be a good idea to have a program where 9-year-olds are going to crawl 15 feet up on a wall and hold on? I remember the first time I began to hear about what we now call elevation risk. Isn't that cute? And I thought, what whack job thought that was a good idea? So it's a good thing I'm not the guy kind of designing the next generation of children's programs, because I promise you they would all involve 2 feet solidly on the ground. But we decided that was an okay thing to do, and I'm glad we did. There's not much that's more inspiring than being out at camp and watching a kid on an alpine tower who's trying desperately to get up to the top and ring the bell or hit the mark, and have a bunch of kids on the ground belaying him or her and yelling up at him. You know, right foot up to the right. Put your left foot back, reach with your left hand. That's when community is at its best. I love that. And then the kid rings the bell and everybody celebrates. Community. But remember when we first started talking about that, lots of us thought, what are we thinking? How do we make sure we do that safely? There's no question it's going to be fun. The question is, will it be safe? And so if it means that we send our people off to be trained, if it means that we spend an awful lot of time understanding how to check the harnesses, how to check the rigging, how to make sure they're tied off not just once but twice. That's the culture of safety that's necessary to accept the risk. And it has to be at the core of everything that we do. Boy, I know we spend an awful lot of time raising money and developing our boards and planning out for appropriate entertainment and dealing with member complaints and all of those kinds of things. I get that. I get all of that stuff. But none of that gets to happen unless people know that when they come to our programs that they are safe, and that's the starter. That's the table stakes. I have 15-year-old twins and a 31-year-old daughter. All three of them have been at camp virtually their whole lives. There are 3 weeks every summer that I think to myself, somebody else is 100% responsible for them 24 hours a day. And they grow and become something wholly other during that period of time every year. I'm grateful to God for that experience. I'm grateful to God that I had that experience myself. But I have to tell you, when I drop my kids off at camp, and I shake hands with Misha Crocker, who's the camp director, who always says to me, "Thank you for sending me my 2 auditors again this summer." Can you imagine having my kids in your camp? But what I say to Misha is, keep my kids safe. That's the table stakes. I'm well aware that this year my son Andy might come home with a mohawk. I got it. But I want him coming home. That's the table stakes. Accepting risk begins with a culture of safety. Second, a culture of safety requires practices to match protocols. Every now and again, somebody will say to me, maybe if we don't write up the protocol, then there will be less liability if something bad happens. If that thought has ever occurred to you or been expressed to you, I want you to expunge it right now. Because what I will tell you is the chances that you will do the right thing are increased unimaginably by writing the protocol down and having everyone commit to it. It is not about limiting liability. It's about keeping people safe. And you will keep more people more safe by creating, writing, and committing to the protocol, and then having the kind of accountability that makes sure everyone lives into those behaviors all day, every day, whether in security or safety or in our community engagement, which is the final point. A safe community requires our actions to match our faith. It's not enough to believe. It's not enough to have faith. Faith without action is dead. We are called to heal this broken world. We're not called to bar the doors and restrict our programs. We're called to go out into community and share what we know and engage with others in a spirit of collaboration and cooperation and mutual reinforcement. Folks, we accept risk all day, every day. And we do the things you're supposed to do to be able to accept that risk. Every day when we put our child into the car, we buckle the car seat or the seat belt or whatever it is that's appropriate. You can't imagine putting an infant anymore in the back of a car without strapping them in, without kneeling into the car seat so that we can strap the car seat down as much. We have to understand who has figured out the damn toggle safety strap things, because if you have, meet me after. Right? And I get it. I understand that lots of us grew up crawling around the back seat. But the data tells you that kids are safer and more likely to grow up and be president of this great country if they're strapped in just like that. And so we do it all day, every day. And how often do we tolerate making a mistake? Oh, I forgot today to strap my infant into the car seat. I have a good friend who for years would come out for a presentation like this and carry a little baby around. The whole time everybody wondered what the baby was about. Of course, it was a doll. And at some point he would drop the baby. Boom. And everybody would react, and he would say, you know what, when it comes to dropping babies, you don't tolerate any mistakes. So once we decide to accept a certain threat, like being welcoming to all, then we have to decide that we will take whatever precautions we judge to be reasonable, and we will take them every day. And we will practice them every day without mistake. But we also understand that no matter what it is that we do, we also accept risks. So that very child that we strapped into the back seat to make sure that they couldn't go anywhere, that the only thing they could do was fire Cheerios at the back of our heads, that very same child we then send off to school or the J or camp or wherever every day. We send them off into the world. We send them off into community. And we depend on others to care for them. It's how we do what we do, because we want our kids to be in community with others. And we want to be in community with others. We're not alone in that boat. We're in community in that boat. I used to think that this was an African proverb, but I'm now told it's not. I'm now told that if probably some guy in Kansas City at Hallmark wrote it in a card 40 or so years ago, but I don't care because I love it. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. How often have you wanted to get something done at work and you've thought to yourself, oh, for goodness sake, if I could just do this on my own, it would be done already. I wouldn't have to worry about all the committees. Probably there was a little too much laughter. We think that all the time, and then we go through the process again. We invite all the stakeholders in, we talk, and we work on things, and invariably, when we've invested with authenticity in that process, invariably, what comes out the other end is better than we would have made ourselves. And the commitment of all the people around us is better than it would have been if we had just implemented on our own. If you want to go far, go together. The best examples of when we do our best work in community are when we do that work together. When we reach across with the open hand and engage in those communities that are new and fresh and odd and other and different to us. Black and white and men and women and tall and short and brown and white and gay and straight. When we bring all of those communities together, we are at our best. Today, in the Jewish community, we feel intensely othered. We feel intensely marginalized. And I hate that. But I want you to know that even in that regard, you are not alone. Just before the election, I was in a little town in eastern North Carolina. We'd had a lot of flooding. The floodwaters had finally gone down, and I was going down to the Boys and Girls Club in Selma, North Carolina, Johnston County, little tiny town. And I was going down to help the Boys and Girls Club recover from the floods, and if anybody's ever done that work, you know that it's just intensely manual labor, right? You're just dragging soggy cushions out of places. You're shoveling mud. It's awful. It's awful work, and there's no way to get around it. It is just what you have to do. And when you get in those situations, a bunch of people show up, Boys and Girls Club, right? So it's every kind of person. Old, young, black, white, right? Every kind of person. And you just kind of get paired off. And so I'm working with some guy, and we're dragging stuff out to the dumpster, right? Y'all have done this kind of work. So, start making small talk. So happens that the night before there had been a Trump rally in Selma, North Carolina. Now, I hadn't been in Selma before. I drove through what I assumed to be the center of town, and so this guy was a native. And he said, "Hey, I understand there was a rally for Mr. Trump last night." He said, "Yep, there was." I said, "Well, just out of curiosity, where was it? Because I came through the center of town, and let's just say I didn't see a convention center." He laughed, and he said, "No, it was out on somebody's farm." And that was as far as we got in the conversation. From what I just said, I promise you, he had no idea whether I was a Trump guy, a Clinton guy, or, somebody other. But at that moment, somebody walked the other direction from the dumpster and heard us talking about that, and he bumped this guy angrily and said something completely inappropriate about Mr. Trump. And the two of the guys, because we are guys after all, right? I apologize for us. Two guys were ready to go at it. And in a flash, somehow, by molecular relocation, the 6-foot-something strong black woman, Mamie, who runs the Boys and Girls Club, appeared between the two of them, took both their arms and said, "Hey, you know what? There's a lot of stuff has to be discussed in this community. It's all important stuff, and the Boys and Girls Club is the right place for those conversations to happen. But they won't happen in my club if they're not grounded in respect. Let me just tell you that right now." The two guys stepped back, took a deep breath, and then a quick man hug. In that moment of grace, I saw who we are when we are at our best. We know what's right to do. We know it's right to reach across the divide and to embrace the other. Later, I spoke with the wife of the guy who I had been working with. She confessed to me that she was a Trump voter. And she told me that that guy I'd been working with hadn't worked in 10 years. And he was a proud man and hated that he couldn't find work. And that he saw Donald Trump as his last best hope. Think what you will about Donald Trump, but what I think about that guy is that his motivations were authentic. And in this society, where the white Christian man is supposedly the majority and completely in charge, that guy feels marginalized and not listened to. Folks, all of us are othered in some way. And who's threatened the most at any given moment is hard to tell. All I know is the collective safety of our community depends on us locking arms, working together, and loving one another. And finding every opportunity it is to express that there is to express that love. I recognize that my message may not be popular. I recognize that the actions I'm calling all of us to are difficult. This is the work the good Lord called us to. I believe that. In 1962, Bobby Kennedy was speaking with the group of young people in South Africa who would become effectively their Peace Corps. He called on them to have what I am asking all of us to have. Here's what he said. Moral courage is a rarer commodity than bravery in battle or great intelligence, yet it is the one essential, vital quality of those who seek to change a world which yields most painfully to change. Of those who seek to change a world which yields most painfully to change. Our natural inclination is often to bar the door, and to suspect the stranger. Often we're called to do that by our members, by our volunteers, and some of that is appropriate. But the most powerful way we are called to respond is to open the door to all, to welcome, to love, to nurture, to engage, and to create a powerful and supportive community. In the history of the Jewish community, the world is better for your engagement. I grew up in the Deep South. As a small child, I lived in Montgomery, Alabama. My dad ran the Veterans Hospital, and in that capacity in the capital city of Montgomery, he was the highest-ranking federal official. Every Wednesday afternoon, he went to the barber shop, and sitting in the chair next to him was George Wallace. And in that barber shop was the back channel that allowed the state government to talk to the federal government. I know what violence looks like. I know what anger looks like. I know what hatred looks like. I know what it means to other an entire community. And I know that today we would unlikely have equality between the races, even such as it is, if not for the powerful and principled outreach of the Jewish community in the civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s. It's who we are when we're at our best. We reach beyond our community to help others. This is that time again. This is that time for us to be who we are when we're at our best. I'm so honored to have had the opportunity to speak to you today, and I'm so grateful for the good you do in the world every day. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much, Kevin. You gave us a whole bunch of things to think about when we go back to our JCCs. I love when you said that we can all be leaders from where we stand. So we are really all leaders in our Jewish communities. Think about that for a moment, whether you are on the front line or the back office jobs that we do at JCCs. Every person that works at a JCC is a leader. We are all responsible for safety and security. I loved the slide about Mind the Gap, because it's not just in London, but on Long Island and in New Jersey, when we travel into the city every day to get to JCC Association, we step over a gap, and I never thought about it the way that you just said it. What are the gaps at our JCCs, and how can we be responsible for filling those gaps? If we see it, we can't unthink it. And so I implore all of you to go back to your JCCs with fresh eyes. Walk through the door on Monday morning as if you were a newcomer and take a look at what your gaps are. How can you, regardless of whether you're the aquatics director or the marketing director, doesn't matter, how can you fix what those gaps are so that we can make sure that when people trust us to have safe facilities and secure facilities, that we are not letting them down. We can be as vigilant as we can, but there are lots of things where we just don't see the gaps. And it's really important for us to be able to do that. Each and every one of us has that job at our JCCs. So thank you for bringing that up and for enlightening us in that way. So immediately following this session, we have refreshments over in the vendor hall. Please do see the vendors and make sure that you get your raffle tickets from them. At noon, we have, right after that, we have our first Choose Your Own sessions. The Choose Your Own sessions will be all held upstairs in all of the breakout rooms. There's a listing of all the different Choose Your Own sessions on page 38 to 40 in your program guide. This evening is dinner on your own. We also have karaoke afterwards. Sarah Sless, who is our assistant director of the JCC Israel Center, is inviting people to join her for dinner if you don't have plans. If you're interested in doing that, you can see Dina at the registration desk for more information. At this time, I'd like you to enjoy the vendors, enjoy a snack that we have for you, and we do have a video? Okay. I'm being told we have a short video, so hang on for a minute.
I think, whether or not you're trying to lose weight because you need to fit into your wedding dress, or, you're fighting cancer, or you've lost your legs, we all have a reason to come here and work out, and no reason's too little. You have to get off the couch and come and be the best you can be. I lost my legs in April. I'm a bilateral below the knee amputee, and my biggest goal was to get back to the Rady Center. I constantly said to my physiotherapist, when can I rejoin, when can I rejoin? I had my amputations in April and I joined in July. Yeah, and I was back at the gym and really pushed myself. I want to reclaim me back. I think when you're sick, or if you all of a sudden gain weight or have something happen in your life, there's this intense desire to get back the old you. So that's my...
That short video shows us the importance of what we do every day when we open our doors to people in our community. Thank you so much for all of the work that you do every day. I wish you have a great rest of your day today, and I'll see you later. Thank you.